Well, hello, lovely listeners. I am delighted to be bringing you a two-part interview for episode 176 and 177 of the Assist with Impact podcast. And even better, I am delighted to be bringing you this double whammy episode set over not a fortnight break, as in one episode now and another episode in a couple of weeks, but I'm actually going to be releasing this twin set, like a twin set of pearls, twin set and pearls set of episodes over two, as in one episode this week and one episode this next week, because I figure that I want you to be able to really listen to them consecutively, if that makes sense, rather than my normal sequence of fortnightly episodes. I'm going to bring them out in a weekly sequence. So you're going to get one drop this week and one drop next week. And the reason I'm bringing them out in two episodes is because I just think we're all very busy, and sitting around and listening to podcast episodes that go on for more than, around 35 to 40 minutes is just a little bit pushing the friendship, I think. So I just think it's nice to be able to have podcast episodes that are manageable. So I have two episodes with my guest that I have broken up for you into these two episodes. So I did one interview and I've broken them up into two episodes. My guest is, you will have obviously seen from the title of the episode, is a lovely, wonderful EA called Nikki-Lee Prismall. Now, this is not Nikki's first rodeo when it comes to being a podcast guest. She was a podcast guest for another wonderful podcast, which I'll put the link to in the show notes, but it's a podcast run by one of my other favourite people, Ursula Kohler, who is the founder and managing director of a company here in Australia called Capital EA. And Ursula had Nikki on her After 5 podcast. And that's not actually where I heard about Nikki. Nikki and I met on LinkedIn. So Nikki-Lee Prismall is my guest. Nikki is the National Manager Business Support at KPMG Australia, and Nikki is based down in Hobart in Tasmania. Nikki is an experienced, confident and very reliable manager with a proven track record in supporting C-suite executives and managing business support administrators nationally. She currently supports the KPMG Enterprise Chief Operating Officer, and she works closely with partners and directors in the firm nationally to source administrative support across all areas of the company, including recruitment, management, and training development and project work. Nikki is also National Manager of KPMG Enterprise's Business Support Network, which is comprised of approximately 40 PAs and administrative personnel who are geographically dispersed. As part of her role, she is responsible for experimenting, incubating and scaling new administrative support services across the division. Nikki's leadership and management skills include developing talent, leading through periods of change, managing performance, and driving innovation through collaboration. Now, let me tell you why I wanted Nikki to come on the podcast. It's pretty self-explanatory when you listen to that bio, but I wanted Nikki to come on the podcast, not just to speak to her experience in her current role, but also to share her journey navigating the career spider frame, because the skills and capabilities that Nikki has built and developed in her career prior to joining KPMG are what has built the foundation for her career success at KPMG. And that is a fascinating story in and of itself. So, as a result, that is what has resulted in this being a two-parter, because there was so much to dig into here. So I have chosen to really explore that with Nikki. So not to give you a spoiler alert, but in this first episode this week, what we do is we really explore Nikki's career trajectory leading up to her joining and beginning her career at KPMG down in Hobart. And then in next week's episode, we really dive deep into what she's achieved at KPMG and her observations on what it really takes to be a linchpin assistant. So there is a lot of meat on those bones, let me tell you, and you will get a lot out of both these episodes. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce this first of 2 episodes, and I want you to enjoy that and come back next week for part 2 of my interview with Nikki-Lee Prismall. Enjoy. Hello, I'm Liz Van Vliet, and welcome to the Assist with Impact podcast. Join me as I explore the competencies and capabilities that allow you to assist with impact. I'll be sharing practical tips, strategies, and insights that will help you move beyond what I call the order taker zone and be that little hinge that can swing big doors. If you're ready to be more proactive and have more impact in your role, then this is the place for you. Let's get started with the episode. Nikki-Lee Prismall, it is so lovely to have you on the Assist with Impact podcast. Thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Liz, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, it is a delight. You will get to hear my introduction when you listen back to the podcast episode. Although if you're like many of my guests, you will possibly not want to listen back, because so many people, and I'm definitely one of these people, I hate listening back to my episodes.
Oh, absolutely.
I hate listening to the sound of my own voice. So don't be like me. Listen back and enjoy listening and celebrating what you sound like, because I know that you are going to have so many great mic drop moments in this episode. So listeners, be prepared. So Nikki, as always, I'm going to start off this interview with the question that I ask all my listeners, and I always preface it for those people that are new to the podcast.
Sure.
Just sort of giving some context to the question. I always ask my interview guests to start off by introducing themselves in the context of a few highlights from their experience navigating what I call the career spider frame or climbing frame, depending on your own experience in children's playgrounds when I say spider frame, it's that thing in a kid's playground that is, you can climb up vertically, horizontally, diagonally, but it's the idea that rather than a career ladder, the old style career ladder that we were all sort of led to believe was going to happen to us when we were at school, we were going to leave school and we were going to start on the bottom rung and climb up and keep climbing. It's not like that at all. And that's never not been my experience. And you're nodding. And I know from hearing you talk that that's not been your experience. So why don't you share with listeners some of the key moments, those pivotal points on your own experience climbing the career spider frame.
Absolutely, Liz. And I completely agree with you. No two journeys are exactly the same, especially in, I believe that's the case in the EA, PA space, because our pathways are different. So yeah, more than happy to share with you how my pathway looks. So I guess from the beginning, Liz, for me, I've always had a natural inclination to help people. And I believe, Liz, that stems from my upbringing. I grew up with a special needs younger brother who needed that extra care. So it was actually quite normal in our household to be extra considerate and extra patient. And this truly instilled in me a high tolerance and understanding and desire to help, and taking the time to listen and be empathetic. So that was my upbringing. And I naturally found myself in the tourism industry when I left school. I did a certificate in that and found myself as the local receptionist in our local hotel, motel. And I was the meter and greeter, Liz, who checked them in and made sure they were looked after while they stayed with us. So that was my first exposure to clients who were coming and visiting, and I was the face of their journey in Tasmania and at that hotel. So from there, I moved into a reservations consultant role, which was for a large accommodation chain where I booked and planned itineraries, Liz. And I had to listen to the needs of the clients because they had different requirements, they had different hopes, different dreams of why they were in Tasmania and what they wanted to get out of their holidays. So that was really satisfying, booking their trip around the state. So I got a lot of satisfaction from making sure that my clients were happy and that their trips were memorable. So that was really, really good in that space. But then I took a bit of a different turn, Liz. I then went from the tourism industry working for an RTO, which was actually in the aquaculture sector. So very different. I was a course coordinator. And what that meant, Liz, was I organised clients to get their coxswain licence for the water. So there was a lot of organising in that and making sure that the classes all went to plan, that the clients had all the paperwork they required for that course. But you know what the interesting thing was, Liz, is that for the first time, I had clients coming to me who didn't necessarily want to come to me. Their jobs required them to have this license. So not all of them wanted to be there and were quite disgruntled, you know, that they had to go through the process to get this license. So that was my first taste, list of conflict management, because some of them were of the older demographic and they hadn't actually been in an educational institution for many, many years. And they found themselves there because they had to. So suddenly I was diversifying my skill set to manage that sort of conflict.
I really love that, Nikki, because what really comes through when you're talking about your skill set is your emotional intelligence that you cultivated at a young age
Mm-hmm.
in terms of your empathy.
That's right.
And your situational awareness about your brother,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm imagining was both about dealing and responding and being mindful of your brother's needs, but also in terms of responding and reacting to people's responses to your brother. Would that be right?
Very true, Liz. And also seeing the way that some people didn't have that understanding. And we would go out into the community and go shopping and do all those sorts of daily interactions. It absolutely, Liz. It was definitely seeing the way that he was responded to by others.
So that I think is really interesting to me, that is where it is these layers in terms of what I see in you. Is someone could say, oh, well, Nikki is somebody, you could just be very superficial and say, oh, well, of course Nikki's got emotional intelligence because Nikki has a brother that is a person with disability. But no, Nikki has emotional intelligence because Nikki has self-awareness and self-insight and is very observant about how other people reacted and related to your brother and treated him out in the world. And I think that is what's really comes through and translates in terms of the way you have then communicated and responded and reacted when you've entered the workforce in these different roles. So I just want to give you a shout out. I think it's a real credit to you. I don't know if you've ever appreciated that is something that you have brought to the table, that it's not just emotional intelligence, it's also emotional intelligence in terms of your self-awareness and your self-insight of what you've developed as a human being.
Very fascinating, isn't it, Liz, that you can look back and recognize that. And they be in tune, I think, with your surroundings and the reactions of people.
So, and I love the fact that you went from a role that, in terms of the tourism role, where you were dealing with, I want to highlight the fact that you've used the word listening a number of times already as a skill. And you'll know from, what you and I have talked about in terms of my sort of training and coaching, I'm a big, listening, active listening is something that sort of pervades all aspects of what I do in terms of working with assistants. But I love the fact that you cultivated your listening skills from right back when you first entered the workforce. So, and that this idea of being able to navigate situations. So when you were in the tourism industry, you were dealing with people that were obviously very excited and looking forward to exploring Tasmania. But then you're dealing with people in the these guys who you were describing, did not necessarily want to be interacting with you at all and did not want to be doing the thing that they were being told they had to do, they were being required to do. So that would have been difficult conversations at times that you were navigating.
Absolutely, Liz. And I think the different demographic was also an extra layer of challenge because they were different from all sorts of paths of life. And found themselves in this role that, they needed this license. So you're right, it was definitely challenging on those fronts. And I guess, Liz, that's where those skills were cultivated, because from there, I then found myself in the financial services industry. And in that financial services environment, there were trustee services that were offered. And eventually I was in the deceased estates area at Tasmanian Perpetual Trustees, which is what it was called at the time. And so, Liz, I found myself there for the next 8 years in deceased estates.
Wow. Okay. So and in terms of being in that role, was that was an office-based role? Was that was that dealing with people so much, or dealing with paperwork?
Both. Yes, we were regulated by legal requirements that we had to abide by. And in addition, Liz, definitely a lot of face-to-face interaction, because the role was varied between beneficiaries from a deceased estate and administering their wills, to power of attorneys, where we were the nominated trustee for someone who had lost capacity, and we had to administer their trust. And so we would have ongoing dealings with the beneficiaries in the trust about money. And when you're dealing with money, Liz, it really impacts the way that people relate to you. I mean, the role was very challenging because a lot of people saw me as a hindrance. I was the hindrance to their inheritance.
Yes,
I was the
absolutely.
hindrance in their family. I was the pain that they had to go through in order to get funding for something. So you can imagine, Liz, that was a very challenging period, but also quite rewarding, that you were able to be there for people during grief. Grief, death, and money, were the main factors in that, role.
So in terms of that, having an awareness that you were perceived as a hindrance and as a barrier between people and, being able to get that financial reward, how did you navigate that personally? How did you stop that from becoming something that got you down and got in the way of you doing your job?
Yeah, good question, Liz, because it does affect you. I mean, we had people yelling at us at times. Emotions would boil over in a will reading, or beneficiaries that had just gotten some news that they were unexpecting. So, Liz, I found comfort in my local team, in particular my manager at the time, who was very understanding, very knowledgeable, had experience in the past dealing in these situations. We also had the law on our side. So, in addition to the mentoring and coaching that I received through local team members, I had to remember that I had to remember the reason why I was there, the role that I was playing. Despite all of their emotions and opinions and thoughts, at the end of the day, I had to keep bringing it to facts and bringing it to the real reason why I'm here. And this is actually the role that I'm playing for you. I'm helping you. I'm helping you navigate this challenging time. Also, Liz, acknowledging their feelings. I mean, that was really important. You don't want to discount their feelings. I mean, these people are going through very difficult times in their life. So you don't want to ignore that. So I found acknowledging that was very important, and taking the time to stop. And once again, Liz, listen.
Yeah, I love that.
Because you wanted them to have a voice. They have
voices, Sorry to interrupt. You're giving everyone a little masterclass in how to manage difficult interactions. Thank you. That's great. Yeah. So let's focus on a particular pivot point that I'd like you to share with the listeners.
Sure.
And this is that pivot point where you transitioned into the EA role.
Yes.
So tell the listeners how that came about.
Yes, Liz. Very interesting, and you would never guess how it came. So how I transitioned was a friend and I actually did volunteer work, Liz, in our personal lives for the INBA Australia. And for those who are unfamiliar with who they are the natural bodybuilding shows that you see, you know, the stage, the fake tan, the lights.
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt you, Nikki. So are you telling me that if I was to go and spend my evening doing a deep dive of Google, I might find a photo of Nikki in a bikini?
Not at all. You will not find that, Liz, so don't try. No, I was behind the curtain.
Okay, right.
No.
Glad we've clarified that.
Clarified that. Yeah, that's for sure. No, I wasn't on the stage. I was behind the curtain. And my friend and I travelled around with the show, and we would volunteer in the background. So we would organise the next group that were about to go on stage with their bikinis, their high heels. We would make sure their hair was in place with lots and lots and lots of cans of hairspray. And then after the glitz and the glam, we would scrub the toilets, Liz. We would scrub that fake tan off the toilets.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So through that experience, I got to know people. And one of them in particular, who was a regular at the shows, knew my work ethic. They knew my personality. They saw it from a distance, and they were actually moving at the time, and they were in that EA role as their day job. So they actually approached me, Liz, and said, look, you're a fantastic worker. You've got a great personality. I really think that you would be great in an EA role. And I had never considered it before. I guess it was something that a career path that hadn't popped up for me before now. And it was because it was something I hadn't been in before. I had to imagine, Liz, how my existing skills and experiences that I had to that date would transpose to the EA role. And I said to them, Liz, well, I look after the dead, and now you want me to look after the living. So that was my first insights, Liz.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. So first off, those words need to be put on a plaque, and then there needs to be a ... underneath it for the next manager. So you get to choose. Are you alive? Are you dead, or are you alive?
Oh dear.
Okay. So let's talk about those transferable skills. So if we think about, I want you to think about the transferable skills that you identified before you stepped into the EA role.
Sure.
What were those skills that you identified before you stepped into the role?
Sure. Well, immediately the people skills.
Yep.
Because I knew that I had that emotional intelligence and the ability to listen and communicate well. So that was the very first thing I thought of. Well, I'm dealing with people, you know, and I know that I can do that.
Yep.
The second thing that I thought of, Liz, well, clearly organising someone means that you have to be a good organiser yourself. And I know that in all of my processes, in my previous roles, which were quite stringent, I mean, especially my last role, which was according to legal requirements, I knew that I was good at checking things off and that getting paperwork in place, collating that documentation. So those were the two particular skills, Liz, that I immediately thought, you know what, maybe I could apply my people and organisational skills to come over.
Okay. All right. So you stepped into the role. Was that, and just in terms of, I'm curious to know, so this was taking on a partner
Yeah, good question. So it was actually an executive assistant role supporting our chief operating officer of the division nationally.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. And so this person that effectively headhunted you, it was, I'm assuming it was a her.
Spot
It
on.
was her role
Yep.
supporting the COO. Was she leaving the company, or was she moving into a different role?
She was moving interstate, and at that point, Liz, we're in a different world now, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. But at that point, you didn't stay with the company if you're moving somewhere, really. It was a bit unheard of, and I guess she had different opportunities before her that she was pursuing in the interstate.
Right.
So, yeah,
Okay.
but she was moving.
Okay. So in terms of you taking on the role, how much how did you spend much time with the COO before you accepted the role?
Good question. No. What I did do, Liz, was I was invited to the Christmas party of the office. Yeah, so before I took the role, I was actually asked to come to the Christmas party to get a feel for the staff, to have the opportunity to talk to different, viewpoints, and see what the office culture, so to speak, was like in those individuals, so to speak. So at that office party, I actually got some insights in regards to the COO himself, but also about the company, which was KPMG. What are our values? What do we stand for? How do they recognise the EA role, etc. So the COO was at that party, but we weren't ever, one-on-one focused on each other. It was a social situation.
Right. Okay. That's so interesting. So interesting. In hindsight, do you feel that was an opportunity so much for you to get a feel for them, or an opportunity for them to get a feel for you?
A bit of both. And in fact, it opened up insights that I wouldn't have got normally.
Fascinating.
Like we were able to, see what the COO was like as a person as well by talking to staff. How did they recognise leadership, at that point in time?
Yeah.
And you know what, Liz? Everyone has a different opinion in life, don't they?
They do.
And everyone had different perspectives and thoughts and experiences. And
so I love the fact that, when you're in a dynamic like a Christmas party, people are not they don't have their guard up.
No.
So they're going to share things that they might not otherwise share if they were sitting in a formal, office environment where you were sitting behind a desk or in a conference room.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. All right. So you then took the role.
Yes. I then took the role and met him with a collation of all of the information that I had from that Christmas party about him. And change is difficult for some, Liz. I know that in this particular case, the EA had been there for many years, like, at least 6 or 7 years, So, yeah, change affects people in different ways, and the way that they approach a change in the circumstances. Remember, it wasn't just him, it was me as well. This was a big change for me. So I was learning new concepts, new things. I was learning about confidentiality as well. And he was learning, well, who is this girl? What is it going to be the same? Am I going to be able to do this? And am I going to be able to say this? So it was definitely a relationship journey, Liz, as well as a learning my role and responsibilities journey.
Well, and that's the thing, Nikki, I'm full of admiration for you because, as somebody that has, stepped into the role of an EA also, as well, having never done it before. But the difference for me was that I did it with an executive who took me on, and he was the one who chose me, knowing full well that I'd never done the role before. So we were sort of in it together.
Right.
So there was, that it was sort of like we were in the rowboat together, rowing together. So slightly different dynamic from the sounds of it. It feels to me like you were, am I right in saying that would have been quite a challenging time for you, proving yourself as an EA in a new company with a new boss in a new role?
100%, on all fronts. And it was something that, it sounds corny, but it's true. I had to believe in myself. I had to believe that I could do the role and that I was recognised to do the role. So I think that was very important for me at the time, was belief in myself and taking the confidence in my abilities. I knew that I could do this. They didn't, at the time. So it was a matter of believing in myself and actually having the confidence to take those steps, Liz, whether it was relationship building, whether it was learning the systems and what the hell I did, on a daily basis. So I think belief in your abilities is really important.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nikki. That's such a great message for people to hear, because, when I do survey assistants about, what is their biggest challenge, confidence does come up consistently as one of the top 3 things. And that self-belief is such a it challenges us in so many areas of our life, not just our work, but yes, that really believing that you can do it.
It's the first step. It's the first step. If you don't have belief in yourself, well, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle to make those strides and reach the milestones that you need to in order to be successful. It's an important part of the recipe.
Yeah. So if we think about what you thought were your transferable skills when you were going into the role, in hindsight, how did were those the skills? Did you see it differently once you'd been in, once you were actually in the role?
Yeah, good question. They were definitely main factors. Absolutely. So I was right about that. What I didn't realise was how deep they would run. They essentially become who you are as a person. I like to describe, Liz, the EA role as a Tetris master, which is what I realised I was learning to be. As those strips fall down, you have to put them in place, and then it eliminates a row, and then more strips come down.
And it gets faster and faster.
Absolutely. So yes, I did realise that those were transferable skills, and it went so much further. The multitasking, Liz, that's involved was quite intense. Suddenly you had it coming from all angles. You weren't just focusing on 2 things and then I'll deal with the next 2 things. It was actually multiple fronts, Liz, that you have to manage. So I think the answer to that question is yes, and it just ran very, very deep.
And in terms of the relationship with your manager, with the COO, talk to us about that relationship.
Yeah, good question, because it takes investment. It takes time, again, listening skills, and it takes investment. What you put in, you'll get out. So I wanted to assure him that I wasn't coming in to take over and to basically uproot any behaviours or existing structure that he may have in place. So the relationship building was very important. So we took the time. We're all busy, Liz. We're all busy, and that busyness isn't going to stop. The world keeps turning, even though our situation may change, okay? So I made sure that we took the time. We sat, we had a coffee. We talked about basically what his priorities were, who he was as a person, his family, because they play such a big role. You try and separate the two, of course, but at the end of the day, they're who we go home to. I wanted to know, what flights he preferred of a morning, because did he have a routine with his wife, that he wanted to keep in place. So that relationship building, Liz, and taking the time and investing in each other, I think is crucial.
Oh, Nikki, thank you for sharing that, because you just really reinforced something that I teach assistants. I talk about the 3 Ps, the preferences, the priorities, and the pet peeves. Yeah, really, because it is just about understanding that your manager is not just there. We're human beings. We're not human doings. But I also love the fact that what you've just really beautifully demonstrated there is exactly what we talked about, half an hour ago, which is your emotional intelligence, your ability to connect with somebody as a human being. You've just really demonstrated how you were clearly able to do that. So, yeah, that's just so wonderful to hear that story.
Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see the show notes, head over to my website. It would be great if you haven't already done so. If you enjoyed the show, if you could kindly go to iTunes and leave a review. It helps other people find the show. Thanks for listening and have a great week.